Hello, everybody. Welcome to this second webinar session in the 6G Research Visions webinar series, organized by 6G flagship and expert groups that prepared 6G white papers earlier this year. Today, we are going to discuss the very interesting topic of essential choices for developing preferred business of 6G in the age of platforms, ecosystems, and empowerment. And this expert group wrote the Business of 6G white paper, and it was led by Seppo Yrjölä, who's also joining us today. So today we have 6 speakers. So I'm going to guide you actually through this webinar session. I'm representing 6G flagship at the University of Oulu, and my name is Hanna Saarela. So the first speaker will be Professor of Practice Seppo Yrjölä, who's going to introduce the business of 6G scenarios as they were presented in the 6G white paper. After Seppo, we have Adjunct Professor Petri Ahokangas, and Petri is going to discuss antecedents of future 6G mobile ecosystems. A very interesting topic. And then after Petri, we have Adjunct Professor Marja Matinmikko-Blue, and Marja will be discussing the role of regulation and spectrum sharing in the 6G era. Fourth, we have Dr. Volker Ziegler from Nokia Bell Labs, and his topic is 6G indicators of value and performance. And then we have Assistant Professor Vivek Kant discussing human-centered design as a business driver for 6G technologies. And then finally, we have Research Assistant Professor Hari Laus-Kumaras, who's going to talk about MNO openness, and which is going to be the next business opportunity. Without further ado, let's begin. And first we have Professor of Practice Seppo Yrjölä. And Seppo will be discussing Introduction to Business of 6G Scenarios. Please go ahead, Seppo.
Thank you, Hanna. Great to have this opportunity to share the business of 6G stories with you. So my name is Seppo Yrjölä. I work as Professor of Practice at University of Oulu, as well as a Principal Engineer at Nokia Networks. It has really been an honor and privilege to work with this international expert group on this white paper on business of 6G project during this year. But before we dive deeper into the details of ecosystem policies, regulation, and technology, I would like to share with you the big picture, the scenarios, the stories we built together. We started by collecting forces relevant to 6G. We started by having hundreds of different forces, and then we end up defining 146 forces that are relevant in 6G business context. We took this kind of transdisciplinary approach that not only looking on technology or not only looking on business model or strategies, but really look at this from political, economical, social, technological, legal and regulation, and environmental, let's say, sustainable perspectives. And it was a good learning experience having both the academics and practitioners of business and mobile wireless telecom infrastructures. So here you can see the smorgasbord of different forces. After we collected the forces, we call them forces, we kind of, as a teamwork, we scored all the forces based on their business impact, business importance, as well as their uncertainty. And here you can see the result of our scoring. The trend means that it's really high impact, but on the other hand, it's the high certainty. So we are pretty well that what is the global warming or spectrum politics or energy related issues. And then on the other hand, where we really focused was these uncertainties, where we have a great variance of scoring. Some people consider it's 5, some people 1, and as well where there's uncertainty that what the future might look like. And one could summarize that now it's very, in these COVID days, we talk about VUCA megatrend, or kind of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, high ambiguity, and that was clearly seen already early this year in our work. Next step in scenario planning is then the work on logic, that what's the logic we used in building scenarios. And we picked the most highest scored uncertainties. And of course, some or combined some of the uncertainties. And by accident, actually, on the results, there was clearly kind of 3 themes coming up. User experience, kind of new user behaviors or human behaviors here, about business strategies on theme number 2, and then the third one about business environment, where this sustainability and different type of even geopolitics and power configuration came strongly forward. In smaller teams, we built and developed 12 future scenarios. Later on in this webinar, we will dive deeper in some of the scenarios from different perspectives, but that's the big picture. And once again, one of the key result and finding was that how nicely these 12 different scenarios, how they could be combined to form a worldview, combined worldview. And one of the key finding here was that there's a strong tension between competitive worldviews, protective worldviews, networked worldviews, and the new one was this empowered worldviews, building on sustainability and others. We as well, we then assessed all the build scenarios based on their probability, plausibility, and preferability. And on that, developed preferred choices to build a kind of preferred 6G business futures. Of course, at this point, very high level kind of strategic, but these are the key choices you should consider in 6G, starting from kind of global drivers or transformative forces like climate change, sustainability in large, and decentralization. And this decentralization was interesting. It's on a technology level, but as well you can think it in a global level about thinking about polynodal world or geopolitics. Then about external barriers and uncertainties, about dominating platforms, winner take it all. How about regulation? And not just spectrum regulation, but data regulation, net neutrality, access to premises. There's a lot of kind of regulation coming with data, with artificial intelligence, with this human machine interfacing. And last but not least, thinking about the new type of customers, new type of users, and even many times we use humans instead of these, that what is the empowered humans using the 6Gs or maybe deciding to opt out of 6G usage, and why is that? There's a lot of disruptive business models. We talk about sharing economy, we talk about circular economy, and how the becoming of this influence. We analyzed and assessed build scenarios based on value configuration and business model configuration. And Petri will dive deeper in the ecosystemic view on that, but one could kind of summarize that in 6G, we are transitioning from open towards open from closed value configuration, and at the same time from supply focused via demand focused toward ecosystemic focused business models. We choose two kind of stakeholder roles to dive deeper, and we created simple rule strategic strategies for kind of traditional mobile network operator who have dynamic capabilities to transform towards 6G, as well as we took a novel player entering the 6G, a kind of greenfield service provider. And this is the summary of business model elements and ingredients. It's well known about, you should think about business opportunities, value, but here in value, it was more like value sharing, value delivering, and co-creating instead of kind of traditional focal firm centric value discussion. Competitive advantage. And what kind of successful business models have in common about growth, scalability, replicability, and sustainability? But traditionally, sustainability has been considered as a business sustainability of your business and feasibility of business. But here clearly with 6G, we are kind of extending this sustainability as well to cover the empowered humans or users, UN Sustainable Development Goal as you wish, and different type of sharing economy. I will stop here and give ball back to Hanna and then the fellow expert group members to dive deeper into different kind of ingredients of successful 6G business model. Back to you, Hanna.
Thank you, Seppo, for the excellent presentation of future scenarios, choices, and strategies, which are at the heart of the 6G white paper on business of 6G. Now we are moving forward to the next presentation, which will be given by Petri Ahokangas. And Petri will be introducing the role of the antecedents of future 6G mobile ecosystems.
Right, I hope you can see the slides. My name is Petri Ahokangas and I come from Oulu Business School, where I lead the Future Digital Business Research Group. And my topic is about the antecedents of the future 6G mobile ecosystems. And as Seppo was introducing, the question is what will be the future of the mobile ecosystems in practice, how they will be changed, and how can we actually understand the transition of the ecosystems and the emergence of new ones as 6G will be coming to the discussion. So what do we actually mean when we're talking about business ecosystems? The mobile communications industry has for long been seen as an ecosystem, and there are actually various different ecosystem conceptions in the research. We may be talking about industry ecosystems, we may be talking about regional ecosystems, innovation ecosystems, business ecosystems, digital ecosystems, and platform ecosystems. And all these are essential for understanding the different aspects and elements of these ecosystems that we may see. And we could say that the software-based components and services and applications that we find in the mobile communications field could be regarded as the digital species in the global selection process, as ecosystems in general mean that the different actors interact between each other and also with the environment. So all these products and services could be seen as species that compete in the ecosystem, therefore giving rise for some kind of evolution for the whole ecosystem. So what do we mean by ecosystem? From theoretical perspective, you can think it from many perspectives. It's about interaction. It is some social network. These different actors in the network may have different attributes, decision-making principles, and beliefs upon which they act. It can be considered as actors that have different kind of multilateral complementarities between each other. And these complementarities are not necessarily fully controlled by any single actor, but are kind of a multi-actor interaction result rather than the controlled by somebody. And then there are different elements in that part. In earlier research, we actually were looking at this Autio et al. Paper, where we were looking at ecosystems in 4 different parts, and that is also the part of the way how I will be presenting these things. So we will look at the ecosystem structures and processes, and also the ecosystem goals and outcomes, and the contingencies upon which the ecosystem works. So if you look at this, what we know about ecosystems in the mobile communications context, we can see that there are different kind of definitions and way of describing these over the years. So if we start from the 3G ecosystems of the early this century, we were looking at the value chain perspective combined with different stakeholders around it. When we went to the 4G, the ecosystem was more seen as a stack of services that were provided by the MNO and then orchestrated so that you can produce and provision services to the customers. When we go to the 5G, then we run into this kind of more open ecosystem kind of elements, but looking at the complementers, competitors, and different kind of stakeholders, even if we could consider it kind of industry, but it's based on the central player, the MNO. And now that we are moving towards the 6G, we find that this way of thinking is more about the interaction that is actually more ecosystemic in a way. And these recent logics look at this interaction between the different elements of the ecosystem, different actors in the ecosystem, to look at the assets that are needed, the different kind of resources that are there, how do we match and share them, and then looking at the different needs and demands that the different stakeholders might have. And the ecosystem might be consisting of different elements. And this previous literature goes to explain these things in different ways. So if you look at the 6G, how will it look like in practice? So if you look at the ecosystem structures, what we will see, and our research indicates, is that the importance of the local context and the need for trust will increase because novel stakeholders might emerge, especially for the local context, and the functioning of these different simultaneously present networks that are partly competing and partly collaborating require new ways of making sure that these resources can be matched. There will be platform-based collaboration where these traditional ways of creating value on a vertical or horizontal structures might change into more complicated ones. There could be novel virtualized service-oriented network architecture that will weigh how innovation ownership takes place and how customer ownership may change from the basic or traditional connectivity provider-centric view towards the service and experience business kind of situation. So these all lead way to this kind of need for more transparent and dynamic data management. And we will also see that the spectrum will increasingly become a generic shared asset, and the importance of from the asset perspective will be in the cloud, especially in the edge clouds. So if these things are in the structures and the resources and actors that are there, the processes of innovation might change. For example, when we bring in sensing into the communications field, when we bring in data and algorithms such as AI, which all will enable novel value flows, influence the complementarity between the stakeholders, and increase competition instead of traditional competition. And then we also might need novel forms of governance, especially for developing the standards, but also to provide trust for the providers that will be working in the 6G environment, and that can not only be managed by the regulation only. So in addition to the regulation, there need to be some kind of a within or inside ecosystem coordination between the activities. And if you look at the contingencies, the external things that are influencing it, then this regulation might change from the spectrum regulation and competition regulation, especially to highlight the user's privacy and security, net neutrality, environmental sustainability, even societal resilience. And novel cross-domain working will increase. So if you think, then what are the goals and outcomes of all this? Fairness and inclusivity and new application areas within the industry and agriculture will be key drivers in the early development of 6G. Specifically, we think AI, reusable data, near real-time communications as sources of innovation will be used as a basis for scaling or replicating solutions in the ecosystems. And we are aiming more towards the sustainability and resilience of the 6G solutions. So what kind of conclusions we can draw on this? Will there be creative destruction of today's mobile communications ecosystem? Well, we see that new roles and new stakeholders will emerge, especially in local operations. There might be convergence with traditional industries and what the MNOs are doing, and then also divergence of current vertical and horizontal value structures within the ecosystem, so new value structures. So in this, we probably should pay attention to what kind of novel ecosystem-oriented strategies there might be, and how to remain competitive in 6G environments. And secondly, what kind of new regulation models and standards and governance models might emerge and be competitive in the 6G area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petri, for a very illuminating presentation. The views on future 6G mobile ecosystem was very valuable. Thank you so much. And next, we are moving forward. We will have Marja coming to discuss the role of regulation and spectrum sharing in the 6G era. And again, Marja is going to sit on this chair so that we can get the perfect lighting and also quality of sound. So,
thank you, Hanna. My pleasure to be here to talk about spectrum-related aspects. A week ago, we were talking about the UN SDGs and their linkage to 6G, and I think that now you will be seeing more and more the sustainability aspect linking all topics of 6G. So my name is Marja Matinmikko-Blue, and I'm here at the University of Oulu coordinating the research of the 6G flagship. And this presentation will be discussing spectrum management, first in the 5G era, which is happening right now, and then some challenges in the 6G time. And so probably many of you are well aware that spectrum management aims at efficient use of the scarce natural resource. And it's supposed to ensure fairness between those different systems, different wireless systems that want to use the spectrum. And here we are especially talking about the mobile communication networks. And the mobile communication sector has been very, very successful in gaining access to spectrum for the past decades, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G spectrum. At the WRC, the World Radio Conferences, many times there have been new spectrum allocated to the mobile service and identified to IMD systems. And the situation today is that there are a lot of spectrum for the mobile communication networks, and those are in the hands of a small number of mobile network operators in each country. But then what is the role of spectrum sharing? We've been doing a lot of research in the whole community for a long time about spectrum sharing that would allow different wireless systems to operate in the same spectrum band under some conditions and rules. But the role of that in mobile communication is still pretty limited. The operators themselves, they are starting to share spectrum between 4G, 5G systems, but still the sharing there is pretty limited. And then there is a big trend towards local operator paradigm. Already 5 years ago, we started to talk about local 5G operators. We were discussing the different verticals having different specialized needs in very local areas. And then we were proposing these new micro-operator concepts that the 5G network should be allowed to be deployed by different stakeholders themselves. And within this, last year we published the first 6G white paper. And there we were also seeing that the local operator paradigm is becoming more and more important already in 5G, but it continues more and more towards 6G. And the role of indoor networks keeps increasing, and the whole trend in spectrum use going towards the higher carrier frequencies. That limits the propagations to shorter areas and local networks. So 5G spectrum regulation, where are we now? There's a wide range of spectrum bands for 5G. If you think about, for example, Europe, it ranges from the 700 megahertz band, 3.5, all the way to 26 gigahertz at the moment. And they are very different in terms of the propagation, and also the deployment models are very different, ranging from the low bands to the higher bands. And this is the thing that the regulators realize that they have to consider different approaches, how to grant spectrum access rights in the different bands. And that discussion was very, very heavy in the past couple of years. And there we've seen that there's a lot of fragmentation between the countries. Even though in Europe, the same band would be used for 5G, and then the decisions on how that band is actually used, they are quite different. And the spectrum arena, whole arena is very tight. There's a lot of conflicting views by the stakeholders, the existing users and the new users. And today, still we are protecting the existing spectrum usage pretty much. So here this is a summary of the traditional spectrum management approaches. Administrative allocation that's where the regulator decides who can access spectrum, and the role of sharing there is quite limited. And then in 5G, we are seeing the emergence of local spectrum access rights, local licenses, and often those are given by administrative allocation paradigm. Then the other big theme is the market-based mechanisms. There, the regulator uses some market mechanism on deciding who gets to deploy the networks. And this is the mainstream approach. Auctions are very heavily used. And there are different rules how that is done. And then the third big theme is the unlicensed commons approach. There, different wireless systems share the same spectrum. They operate under the conditions that the regulator has defined. So the role of 5G in these three different basic spectrum management approaches is that it's there in all of them. It used to be mainly administrative allocation, then more and more market-based mechanisms, but now also 5G wants to be deployed in the unlicensed bands. So there's a lot of fragmentation, the whole big picture in terms of spectrum access. It's way more complicated in 5G than it ever was in 4G. So local licensing models, they have emerged in 5G. That's a big theme, and we were pushing that development already a few years ago. And the idea there is that we have the traditional exclusive licensing, we have the general authorization, license exempt, and then the local licensing, we can define local access rights, give them to different stakeholders, and there we would have predefined levels of interference and for the deployment of those different networks. And then that could allow new entry to the market, to new players. And that is happening now in 5G. That is really happening in different countries, but at different speed and in different ways. And then some examples, we've been looking at the 5G spectrum awards. They are happening all the time. So there are different bands, and also the strategies that the governments have taken, they're very different. For example, Finland has auctioned the 3.5 gigahertz band to the existing 3 operators and did not make big money because it was not about collecting money from the operators. After that, the 26 gigahertz band was auctioned with nationwide licenses, but part of that band was left aside for local networks. On the other hand, some other countries have collected way higher revenues in the auctions. Some have introduced local licenses, while others have not. Already a year ago, we wrote a paper on the 3.5 gigahertz band comparisons and saw that there's a huge fragmentation. Even within Europe, the approaches have been different, how the band has been allocated or given to the different users. And what we've seen that in 5G, we have all these different spectrum management approaches there. So then moving forward in terms of time challenges in the 6G era. So in 6G, we are starting to talk about terahertz band, new spectrum bands. The variety of bands keeps increasing. The existing bands for mobile, those stay there. You can still deploy systems in those bands, most likely. But there's the quest always for more, and the variety of bands keeps increasing. And also the fragmentation of spectrum management approach, that is a real thing that is happening now. And at the same time, there is pretty big rivalry between the different stakeholders who are just competing over the spectrum access, those who currently use the bands and those who would want to enter those bands. And the only solution that I see is the role of spectrum sharing, that it should now finally become more and more important in 6G. So the big challenge is that the opposition to spectrum sharing is pretty strong. We've done a lot of research, and many of you have done a lot of research on that and trials, but it's not that easy. And it's well known that it's about efficiency, that if the spectrum is not used efficiently, we are wasting our resources. And equality, 5G is coming to the big cities, but not so much in the challenge areas. And with different frameworks for spectrum access, it would be better if the different stakeholders could deploy their own networks. And at the same time, it's about control. Different stakeholders are looking into their own networks where they would not have to rely on the big mobile network operators to have their own local 5G networks. So what should we do in 6G? The flexibility and sharing, they should be the new norm. And the spectrum use itself should be way more sustainable at the societal level. Right now, it's more optimizing within the system itself, but there is not much optimization across the whole spectrum arena. Then it all goes to cost. It's not about the money. Money should not be the only measure for success. So regulators, when deciding on the spectrum as making decisions, it goes through the value of spectrum. And the traditional ways to define the value of spectrum is engineering value and economic value and strategic value. And they are more about the monetary benefits from the use of the band. But how should that whole thing be defined in the future? We did a study on the elements of spectrum value, and we realized that it totally depends on the stakeholders, what they are, how they see. If we have the existing large players, they have a totally different view on the value of spectrum than it is for a small entrant who does not have any spectrum assets itself. Another one is the offered services. When deciding on what use should be allowed in a band, then we are looking into the expected future revenues and costs. And this gets more and more blurred in the 6G because the services, it's not only about the communication service in 6G, but there the communication service is combined with locationing service, imaging service, sensoring services. And those then provide different applications. And it's no longer traditional mobile broadband connectivity. Also, the spectrum awarding mechanisms are very important when defining the value of spectrum, and then the different band specific characteristics. It's totally different to deploy your network in the different spectrum bands in terms of the number of base stations and so on. And also the location has a lot of difference. The different areas have very different profitabilities and also costs. So all this needs to be rethought in 6G, because the 6G systems, they will be different from what we see that the networks are doing today, and the sustainability should be taken seriously. So here are some challenges and research questions for the 6G arena about the spectrum management approaches, markets, valuation and pricing. And one big thing is the long time spans, because this requires coordination at so many levels, regional levels, international levels, and there the timescales are really long. But the world is changing pretty fast, and there it's about protecting the existing usage. So how could the spectrum sharing really be introduced into that big picture? And that goes down to interference management between the different systems. There are a lot of big questions there. So to conclude, 5G already, the spectrum management is different in 5G than it was before. There are a lot of different, there's so much more variety, different bands, different spectrum management approaches. As a new thing, there are the local licenses and also going to the unlicensed bands. And the market is now starting to be open for the dedicated networks in addition to the countrywide networks. And this has started, and it will just continue when we go towards 6G. And our role really is to work towards a more fair and sustainable use of the radio spectrum in 6G. So my question there is that, is the time finally mature for real spectrum sharing solutions in 6G? They're not there yet today, but I really hope that in 10 years from now, they will be there. Because selfishness is not the way forward. And then there's some further reading that you can find. So thank you. That was my overview of spectrum management approaches. Thank you.
Warm thanks to Marja for these insights on spectrum sharing and regulation. And the slides actually which are presented today will also be available on our website, so the 6G channel afterwards. So for instance, the further reading you can then have a look at later on, and all the nice graphics that our speakers have been presenting. Now it's time to give the floor to Volker Ziegler, and he will be introducing 6G indicators of value and performance.
Thank you, Hannah. So this, ladies and gentlemen, indeed is about the future. It's about value and performance. And obviously we at Nokia Bell Labs are passionate about technology to connect the world. And when you now look at 6G, it's truly about enabling the foundation for the future. Just as a brief element of level set, and I can't resist to briefly do this, since 6G research is on, not just at Nokia Bell Labs in Finland, Stuttgart, Munich, and many other places, but also in the research community worldwide. So the four, if you like, defining elements from a technology architectural angle, if we were to mention these, one would be ubiquitous compute in the sense of a truly heterogeneous cloud infrastructure of the next generation, unseen level of ease of creation, placement, scaling, and movement of applications, and the efficiency with which they can be executed. And just to maybe mention one aspect, particularly being able to discover capability of connected clouds. Another dimension clearly is about precision sensing and actuation. So here, what is truly very different and new and revolutionary is this idea of co-designing systems for both communication and sensing purposes. And then, of course, if you move this into a bigger architectural as well as value chain and ecosystem development context, there's this whole notion of cognition, of leveraging machine learning and AI, and thereby creating what de facto are very powerful knowledge systems, at least conceptually creating at this time. And of course, last but not least, it's about human-machine interface. And all of this, ladies and gentlemen, ties into this very prominent vision as we have at Bell Labs, at Nokia Bell Labs. It's about connecting the worlds. And when we say connecting the worlds, as you can see, I think it was shown here, what we have in mind is connecting physical world, digital world, and biological world. And thereby truly creating opportunity to create value and associate performance in unforeseen ways in a variety of industries and for consumers alike. You could broadly cluster these into augmenting our intelligence, finding new ways to work with the machines. Definitely it's about creating, consuming novel, new digital worlds. By the way, Hannah, next time we do this a year, like once we have 6G, we should probably do it with mixed reality telepresence, so avatars meeting up virtually in a virtual room, discussing our research and sharing our ideas. And then, of course, controlling the automatons might be another dimension, which is very exciting and very powerful, so as to unlock also business value in the right way in going forward. So with this, let's have a quick look at performance indicator and value indicators as we at Nokia Bell Labs would probably associate with 6G. And this is back of the envelope view. It builds obviously on the one hand side on technology architectural insight, and then of course kind of highlighting some of the dimensions of value. So on the performance indicator side, one way to structure this would be very broadly clustering into device and network. However, now keep in mind when we say device, this might be very different from 5G. It might be very, very different in the sense that we may see a lot of decomposed devices. Part of the device might be you integrated with the human body to the degree we want this. Think of tattoos on the skin. I think we've seen some of these. And then of course, when you look at devices, performance indicators as associated, you would think of number of devices, truly moving to billions of these. You would look at device density, right? Millions of devices per square meter. You would look at the design opportunity to go really zero energy. And last but not least, we touched on this briefly, it's about augmented man-machine, human-machine interface in conjunction with what we call today device. On the network side, again, some indicators, you see them kind of listed on the lower left-hand side of the chart. It's clearly one of the key opportunities we have in conjunction with 6G technology and architecture is really to go specialized. So you will see extreme attributes of performance that are not provided nationwide. That will make sense, but they will be provided for very specialized, locally focused scenarios of usage, right? Think of factories, for instance, think of sports stadiums. And then, of course, some of these parameters we are familiar with also from previous Gs, such as throughput, coverage, latency, reliability, and pushing the envelope beyond what 5G can do. More excitingly, flexibility, automation. By the way, this ties into value categories of security, to say this up front, precision and location, and last but not least, very important, sensing and security and privacy in its own right. On the right-hand side of the chart, then, what you actually see is a high-level list of value indicators as building on these performance indicators, and we can discuss more once we move to the discussion as to what the underlying technologies and architectural elements are. But in terms of value indicators, broadly clustering these into growth and efficiency and sustainability, you can clearly see on the top of the list, no surprise, it's about growth, it's about economic growth and jobs, but also excitingly, it's truly about new value chains and business model, from the fact that on the one hand side, we have very localized, specialized cases, but wide area still plays a role. So we can, and a very, very important role, so we can think of, for instance, new ways of interconnecting value chains between, for instance, factory and logistics, very obvious opportunity. And then there's this whole bucket of value around efficiency, sustainability, very powerful. Energy, no surprise, number one, but then that list goes on. A lot of opportunity with megacity, open collaboration. I think it has been mentioned as a prominent opportunity in conjunction with 6G before, with profound implication for ecosystem and for 6G business. Value capture, personal protection, disaster recovery, security, privacy, and trust. Cost of ownership, by the way, when we talk to some of our operator customers, that's the number one they typically raise. But of course, also it's about time to market, flexibility, and last but not least, finally connecting the unconnecting, serving the underserved areas. And that's, of course, where some of the new innovations in conjunction with non-terrestrial networks would kick in. So with this, let's kind of wrap this up, give a quick look at an attempt at an indicator heat map. So what is a heat map? A heat map is kind of a chart, as you can see here, where you sort of show two dimensions, namely performance, as previously introduced on the previous slide, and value. And then kind of by profound insight, or in this case, by asking some knowledgeable colleagues, experts from Bell Labs, you would broadly cluster like, which are the performance attributes that help you drive certain aspects of either growth and or efficiency and sustainability. So the indicative heat map we've come up with is what you can see here. So just to highlight maybe some of the top areas of heat in a positive sense, economic growth, definitely from the fact that we will have so many more devices connected, yes. Zero energy devices will have huge impact on TCO. That's definitely also a big driver. Mega cities, maybe they are the big issue. And now I would be thinking of places like Manhattan, maybe not so much downtown Oulu, I don't know, you tell me, but devices per square meter might be another driver, a very big one for the smart megacity value. And then you can read for yourselves also dimensions of network driving value and economic dimension. And indeed, no surprise, this notion of going specialized, of going private and campus, and probably with more than 10 million of these networks, eventually this will definitely have huge impact. The flexibility and automation paradigm with thousands of slices, therefore going beyond the limits of physical systems, really tailoring software stack and hardware to the specific need will have tremendous impact on ecosystem, cost of ownership across ecosystems. And maybe last but not least, also the new ideas from the security arena will have huge impact of value in the sense of sustainability and making sure that our values and privacy should be added here explicitly. Our values in Europe, and as we stand for also at Nokia in a special way, they don't get compromised in the 6G era. So summarizing, it's all about value in dimensions of growth, efficiency, and sustainability. We look forward to make it happen. And with this, back over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Volker. That was brilliant. So the 6G indicators of value and performance certainly are crucial for the success of 6G. We can all probably agree on the basis of what you just told us. Thanks again. And then we are moving forward to our fifth speaker. So Vivek Kant will be introducing human-centered design as a business driver for 6G technologies. And this is a very interesting topic. I'm sure will be very eyes-opening for a lot of folks. So please start presenting, Vivek.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. My name is Vivek Kant. I'm calling up from India, Mumbai. The weather is actually quite humid today outside, but now that you all are all spread across the world. So I wanted to introduce the notion of human as a central concept in thinking about 6G technologies. Was the whole idea of how technologies relate to our everyday life and everyday existence is through these actual interactions that we have with technologies. And that's the key angle I'll be presenting in this very short talk. So the idea of design being a business driver is not new. We have this notion of design being at the center for design and pushing consumerism, then styling and aesthetics as a motivator for consumer desire. This has been going on. There's nothing new in that. But what is now new in our industry 4.0 is the way we are using design and using it for industrial systems. Also, the challenge is how do we involve 6G technologies and how do we integrate human-centered design in 6G technologies? That's the future question that we have to ask. Now, in terms of our design scenarios, the question is that in our times, what is happening is that there's a change in the mindset of consumers, prosumers, and other kind of users in general. Part of it is rapid growth of consumer products and change in the manner in which people are interacting with media. And also this interaction is changing the way we use interactive products as well as the design for interactive products. And there's what we see is a convergence of different paradigms. So new media design, whole body interaction, ubiquitous computing. These are very hot topics in human computer interaction as well as in interaction design. So what we are really seeing is that there's a convergence of a lot of these trends, and that is causing a change in the mindset of our future users. And what we call in the white paper, what we've called is that there is a growth of a new demographic. And this is centered around optimal user experience. So we call this new demographics the experientials. So similar to millennials or any other demographics, what is very interesting about experientials is regardless of wherever they're coming from, whatever age they are coming from, whatever background they have, because of the convergence of interaction and new media products, we are expecting that good design, user-centered design, will move away from the notion of want and become a need for these people. So good design, human-centered design is a must that we have to consider right at the very beginning when we are designing for 6G technologies. So apart from this, so this is the summary of selected scenario logics. What I really want to focus on is the first one, the notion of user experience, and how do we grow this idea of user experience beyond just the two words of user and experience. So this is your ecosystem view of the three nested levels that we have for our 6G business. And what is interesting is that the innermost core, whether of 1A to 1D, whether it's customer 6.0 or even your communities or smart societies, all of these are actually influenced by the levels above. So business, the second level, is driving the level below, and that is in turn driven by these large scale systemic concerns. So this is very much, when we are designing for the human-centered approach is very much an ecosystemic approach. And this relation between the customer, the user experience, which is there at the core, is actually a bidirectional relationship. We are looking at the furthermore higher levels shaping the inner levels, and in turn, these inner levels are shaping the higher levels. So this kind of interaction between nested levels at different time scales is of crucial concern for us when we think about human-centered design. Then a challenge then becomes how to make human-centered 6G design futures possible. So this is the core of the first level. And notice that what I've done is I've taken the notion of the human and brought out two different concepts over here. User-centered, which is quite prominent in human-computer interaction and other interaction design-oriented fields. But I also want to highlight that there's another aspect that we need to consider for the human, and specifically for industrial systems. And this is operator-centered systems. And there's a huge difference when we think about user-centered and operator-centered. In user-centered, the core becomes the human user, and then you are designing technology. Oftentimes you focus on the user as the central aspect. In contrast, in operator-centered systems, what you are really thinking about is the operator and the technology together. The operator being a part of the technology, and the technology being the operator's ecology. So in this notion of operator-centered design, what we are really thinking about is not just the concerns of the operator, which is very important to us, but also issues such as reliability, availability, maintainability, safety. These are your traditional industrial systems concepts that we need to specifically design for when we are thinking about operator-centered systems. Which means that when we think about user-centered design, we start from the human and move towards the technology. In human and technology, for operator-centered systems, we start from the technology while considering the human, which means we fit the human along with the technology together. So both have to be considered. And just because we are starting from the technology in operator-centered systems doesn't mean that we are devaluing human experience. Actually, it's quite the opposite. We recognize that the human is part of the technology, and we think about the human and technology together as a unified unit. So this differentiates user-centered design and operator-centered design, but both of them are human-centered design. And this notion of human has to be explored more and will be explored more with the coming in of 6G technologies. So I end with this large slide where I point out certain questions. Some of these questions are there in the white paper that we've discussed. Some of you all may have read it. Things about how is experiential design connected to business models? How can we derive value from these new business models, specifically which has experiential design as a core? Then how can user empowerment be ensured through the technology design? Then how can novel regulation and governance principles be supported through design? And also what kind of design frameworks, tools, methodologies are required to leverage 6G businesses? So that's all from my end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivek. The introduction on human-centered design futures from the 6G perspective was highly intriguing. And again, the presentation will be available on the website after this session, probably tomorrow. So last talk will be given by Harilaus Kumaras, who will introduce mobile network operator openness, the next business opportunity. So the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you all for attending this very interesting workshop and webinar. My presentation will try to bridge the gap between the 5G novel business opportunities and the 6G business ecosystem that is created. Starting from the current status, in order to identify the business opportunity, currently a network evolution takes place in different areas, in the wireless access, in transport, in cloud, in network applications. We notice that a lot of stakeholders around the world, communication providers, service providers, have already started to transform their systems in order to meet the new paradigm of 5G, which relies to off-the-shelf servers and to softwareization with scope to provide an open, a cost-effective, a scalable, and programmable network. Based on this change, a real value proposition that starts to in 5G and will be inherited in 6G is the network programmability, the 5G programmability. This is considered one of the key success that will take place in 5G and will allow to third-party developers, to external entities to expand further and improve further the performance of their services by utilizing characteristic features that the 5G core network offers. So the 5G network programmability relies on the fact that the 5G core network abstracts and exposes specific network capabilities via APIs in order to support use case specific performance requirements. So this creates the capability for many externals, stakeholders, third-party developers, software houses, service providers, application providers to make business with the mobile network operators and to increase the quality of experience that they offer to their customers, and also together with the mobile network operators to improve their positions in the OTT value chain. This is a very visionary figure provided by Ericsson. If we consider that we have an initial revolution a few years, many years ago, by opening the operating system of the smartphones or the mobile phones, which allowed a creation of a huge ecosystem and a marketplace of mobile apps, of many independent developers that designed and created and developed their own applications, realizing new services, new business models through the mobile apps revolutions, let's say. 5G is the starting point, and according to my humble opinion, 6G will be the realization of this new revolution for the creation of new business models where the developers will not only limited to utilizing the operating system of a mobile phone for building their applications, but will now utilize and make use of all the features that are offered by the mobile core network of the mobile operator. So the mobile phone app store will gradually become a mobile network app store supporting more advanced use cases, new businesses, new use cases, replacing, for example, existing services or make them more advanced. So 6G, 5G is the initiator, and 6G will further manage to create this new ecosystem where the core network is really open for further programmability to third parties. This revolution does not happen by chance. There are specific technology enablers in 5G and beyond 5G networks that will create, let's say, all the necessary background for 6G in order to further make use and expand this new business ecosystem. Choosing among the most, let's say, important, we have to select three, which are the service-based architecture of the core network, the cloud-native implementation, and the microservice architecture of the different functions in the core network, and the DevOps, the continuous integration and continuous delivery in maintaining the core system and the whole ecosystem of the different applications that will be built, having a very tight integration with it. So this technology enablers create a new, let's say, modality in the network itself. Currently, mainly we are experiencing in one way, let's say, network in terms of delivering a service, while gradually with 5G and later on this becomes, as Seppo described, further more expanded with 5G and 6G. With the introduction of the edge computing, we start to have close interactions between the users and the mobile apps and the apps that are located in very close proximity from the UIs. So all these changes create this new business opportunity. Just to have, for the sake of the presentation, a very brief discussion on these technology enablers. The service-based architecture in the 5G core actually consists of different network functions which are exposing specific service-based interfaces. We can call them APIs, where these APIs are communicated through a service bus, and they are also exposed to externals through the NEF function, where this creates a tremendous possibility to external third parties to get involved, to be engaged in the business of 5G and beyond 5G systems, and then later on in 6G, in order to enhance their services and make use of all the advances that 5G and later on 6G will deliver. This is the starting point for this new business ecosystem. Following on on the service-based architecture is the cloud-native and microservices-based approach for realizing the 5G core system, which creates a reliable, scalable, flexible ecosystem, which together with the external developers and the network programmability realizes the very short time to market for the new services, for the new application that is needed in order 5G, 6G to be able to serve the needs of the different vertical market and vertical industry. So the microservices and the cloud native approach is, let's say, the technology enabler that together with all the tools that comes with this ecosystem, the centralized orchestration, the open APIs, the service mesh, and so on, creates this agility that is needed for the new business to follow the environmental changes and the new challenges. And through this, let's say, process, new services and new paradigms will be produced. And finally, the continuous integration and continuous delivery approach, the DevOps, will allow all this ecosystem, all this tight integration of the services with the mobile operators, with the 5G, with the 6G, to follow the life cycle of the service itself and to be able to maintain continuously new versions to give answers very rapidly to new challenges and to keep the whole system utilizing this life cycle management in ready to give answers and to reply to new challenges. There are some initial, let's say, research approaches in this. There are 3 European projects, 5G, 5Genesis, 5G, 5G Vini, that follow the paradigm of exposing common APIs to third parties, to external, in order to test and deploy and experiment with new services on top of 5G systems today, but this is just a starting point and the evolution will follow with beyond 5G and 6G systems. In 5Genesis, for example, project, there is an open 5Genesis suite. This is a group of software tools that exposes APIs for attaching services and controlling these services in a unified way across the 5G system. But it's not only the European research community that further work on this opportunity. There is also 3GPP activities, SA6 group, for example, which is closely and continuously works towards the business APIs exposure. A first approach in this is the CAPIF, is the Common API Framework, which has been first presented in release 15, which is a unified northbound API framework across the network function of the core in order to ensure that there is a single, unified, harmonized approach for the external to interface with the core network. The CAPIF has been further updated in release 16, where we have the eCAPIF, which bring also new features where different CAPIF domains can be interconnected in order to provide additional APIs from one single domain. Another result, another item of interest from the 3GPP is the SIL, the Service Enabler Architecture Layer for Verticals. This has been introduced in release 16, and the purpose of it is to support different vertical applications, different vertical industries, where specific common, let's say, services, common application enabling services are defined, like group management, configuration management, location management, identity management, network resource management, in order all these capabilities to be able to use by applications, by services in a common and unified way. So as we further progress with new verticals, new services, the seal is further expanded, including new capabilities and new features. Finally, we have also European projects that make use of the Release 17 studies that 3GPP performs. For example, there is studies about UAS integration in 5G. There is, especially there is on integration of the factories of the future of smart manufacturing, time-sensitive networking and TSN deterministic networking integration with 5G, and also V2X services and applications. Already some European projects are in tight collaboration with these initiatives. I can mention 5G drones that University of Oulu coordinates, which examines also the integration of UAS drones, to say in a similar way, with the 5G system. So the challenge now for 5G and the next releases of 5G is to bring all this together in order to create a unified ecosystem with all these ingredients, on top of which the new business ecosystem will be built, is the new challenge. There are some initial proposals towards it, where the seal, the CAPIF, the edge computing, and the specific vertical application enablers are discussed to be integrated, creating a common, let's say, layer between the core system and the vertical application providers. This is the core challenge for the evolution of the 5G towards enabling new business opportunities, supporting the creation of new software, let's say, ecosystems, new group of developers where they will not focus only on local exploitation of capabilities of mobile phones, but will expand their services in order to include the tight integration with the core system and the exploitation of new characteristics and the new performance and the new performance indicators and KPIs that the 5G system and later on the 6G system unleashes, creating opportunities for new services and new business. So concluding my presentation, the 5G has now the opportunity to really transform the business role of the mobile network operator to the vertical industries. Different actors are working towards this direction, from 3GPP to research community to stakeholders, and this is only the beginning. This is the initial path where the 5G starts from EMBB, URLLC, and MMTC in order to make this openness of the mobile network operator a reality. And then comes the 6G, which will be the final destination with the new KPIs, the new performance indicator that it introduces, will further expand this business opportunity and will maintain and provide sustainability for this new business ecosystem. That's all from me. Thank you very much for the attending. Hannah, the ball is back to you.
Thank you, Yrjölä. It was very interesting to hear about the business transformation with 6G as the destination. And now our destination is the Q&A section. We are moving to the view which you can actually see at the bottom of your screen, most likely. So we will begin with the question about cellular networks which have almost replaced fixed telephony services. And this question will go to Yrjölä. So do you think 6G networks will replace any other traditional services? For example, 6G terminals will have new use cases. So please answer, Yrjölä.
Yes, thank you, Hannah. I think that this is the normal evolution that everybody expects. This happened, what history has taught to us. This has happened to different media services, especially in the multimedia industry. And I think that with 6G and 5G and 6G, the evolution now comes to many different vertical industries with special focus in areas with where private mobile networks, private 5G networks, private 6G networks, like smart manufacturing, for example, can be deployed. Because I think that this is the starting point, considering also that there are security considerations if we talk that we open public networks to different vertical industries. So the answer is yes, of course. And gradually, the new services will be introduced in different areas and different markets.
Very good. Thank you so much. And then we have a question about the roadmap or discussion for interference management in 6G as a spectrum sharing and unlicensed spectrum will increase interference. Marja, would you like to answer this question, please?
Thank you, Hanna. It's always a case and band-specific issue, this interference management. And so far, it's been really static, even in terms of the mobile communication networks, all about protecting the existing users or kicking them out from the band and then giving it to the mobile network operators. It's been so static. It's not really about spectrum sharing or interference management. There have been no roadmaps for that interference management in a large scale. And that's something that should change in 6G.
Thank you, Marja. And then we have a question to Volker, or Volker probably would like to comment on this one, which is more like a statement. So 6G terminals will have new use cases that might affect other related industries. So do you have something to comment on this one, Volker?
Yeah, I think thanks, Hannah. So the comment / question is very appropriate. Why? Because 6G truly is about unlocking value across industries in ways that go beyond what 5G can do, right? And I think we briefly discussed some of the performance attributes, extreme attributes such as ultra reliability, right? 9 nines of availability, extreme low latency. And this then opens up a new avenues also in terms of business model and ecosystem. And by the way, let's keep in mind that the specialized networks, however, still tie into wide area networks. And also, last but not least, the way modems and or devices change will also play a role with all this, and a very powerful role in the sense that you get multi-purpose form factors. So pretty exciting road ahead in that sense.
Thank you, Volker. And the next question is very crucial. It's about connecting the unconnected, and the question goes, what are the business incentives for affordable devices in the domain of $10 to $20 for the unconnected? Petri, do you have something to say about this?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think that currently the situation is such that it's a volume business. There are a lot of those still who are unconnected. So the incentives might be something that they are not coming from the companies to create products for that segment, but we need somebody here to help. And in that, maybe, for example, the governmental bodies or governments themselves could actually subsidize that kind of services and devices. So, and I think that it's not only the device question, but it's also the price of service question.
Thank you so much, Petri. And then there is a question about spectrum management for non-terrestrial networks, and whether satellite services, for instance, in multiple countries, whether they actually can be more complicated than terrestrial networks. So Marja, do you have an answer for this question?
Yes. So the spectrum management is all about the different wireless services, the mobile service, especially the cellular systems. It's an own thing, and the spectrum bands are being sought for those. And satellite is yet another ecosystem which is competing with the mobile cellular networks about the access to the spectrum. And those who have the current rights to use a certain band, whether they are satellite, mobile, or whoever they are, they defend their rights. And then if anybody else is trying to come, it creates a lot of rivalry, it creates a lot of battle between these, and then it's the regulators' decisions to allow these. So they are different systems competing and sharing the role of sharing still today is pretty small, but there's a lot of room for that. And when it comes to overall satellites, they play a role in certain areas. They are the only solutions where we don't have terrestrial networks. But then the spectrum management part, it's separate for them. It's separate for these different wireless services.
Thank you so much, Marja. And then a question to Seppo. So how do you see the role of societal or governmental players in the future? For instance, in making sure that the critical services are available for all citizens everywhere?
Great question, Hannah. And as we discussed, it's from close to open was one theme we discussed. The other theme was this empowered users and human-centric. But what makes communities, what makes smart cities, it as humans? And in one set of scenarios we created, actually, it was a community-centered. And in all these scenarios, governments and municipals and communities plays essential role, this kind of public-private partnership. And then geopolitics we shortly touched. It's totally different approach in, you think about China, or you think about US, or you think about Europe, how communities and governmental bodies will influence. But clearly in these COVID days, this kind of resiliency, trustworthiness, and then productiveness and efficiency of networks as a platform for productivity and growth plays essential role. So there are different approaches in different parts of the world, but that was in 3 or actually 6 of our scenarios. This played an important role. So very good question, and this is really growing trend.
Thank you, Seppo. And then there's another question about 6G business models. What are the incentives for micro operators providing access? Or from the other hand, how do we motivate operators for reusing existing networks? So Seppo, would you have a brief answer to this question, as we're running a little bit short with time?
Yeah, maybe that one study we did was that what's the worth of providing this vanilla service, mobile broadband? It's roughly 1 trillion a year. And then if we look at what is the opportunity in serving different verticals, different critical infrastructures, communities, that's 3 to 11 times higher. So, and in many of these verticals, there's kind of this average revenue per user. It's many times, it could be 10 times, 100 times more than what we humans are willing to pay for mobile broadband. So the money, follow the money. So there's a clear incentives for micro operators, and micro operators will be many kind of local operators. They could be as well kind of global players having then local networks. Mobile network operators will play a role as micro operators. So there's a clear incentives for that, no doubt about it.
Thank you for illuminating answer, Seppo. And then there's a question about spectrum pooling or use it or lease it approach taken by Italians. And the question goes, how to boost such approaches in terms of business profitability? So this was just an example. Marja, so what do you think about the approach, for example, mentioned here?
Thank you, Hanna. If I had the power, if I could say what should be done, I would introduce this use it or share it approach to every single band. I mean, if you have the rights to use a band and you don't use it everywhere, like if you are an operator, you have a countrywide license for 3.5 gigahertz band, there should be the obligation that when you don't need it, you should lease it to somebody else. Or somebody else is allowed to use it. Then what the conditions are, that's a different question. But this is the new thing, and it's starting to take place. Like, for example, the UK is already introducing that kind of approaches. We are still far away from that here and in many other places. But if I had the power, that would be the approach that I would introduce in the bands.
Thank you so much, Marja. Now we just have time for a last question. We are 1 minute, have passed 1 minute from our schedule. So let's take one last question and that'll go to Volker. So the question is, what use case is the performance indicator for 6G, which was shown in your slides? Where does it derive from? And for example, how did you determine the network throughput as more than 100 gigabits per second? So can you tell us something about this? And there's also an additional question about holographic presence.
I like that last question and also the previous one. So this, Hanna, ladies and gentlemen, is about the next generation of communications for the 2030s. So first of all, we want to make sure we aim high. We want to be bold, but at the same time, it needs to be scenarios of value. And so I think the attendee who asked that question about 100 gigabit per second, he already had a suspicion, and he's right, he or she. It's truly, I guess, once you start looking at use cases of mixed reality, where you go telepresence or co-design scenarios, high resolution mapping in conjunction with movement, that's where you end up with such high data rates, right? And you could build similar line of arguments for other extreme performance parameters. And what I can tell you is that all of these are justified by some potential scenario of usage, all of them valuable. Let's make sure at the same time, though, maybe that's the right way also to end the session. This is also about investing for the unknown. We don't know all the use cases yet. And that's also good and appropriate, even though at the end of the day, we want to make sure this translates into value for society and business impact. With this, back over to you, Hanna. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Volker, and this was a great ending for today's webinar. And the discussion will continue. We will send you a feedback form tomorrow, which will be online. Please answer that because we are asking for your experience, how your experience today was, and also you can suggest future topics of interest to you. We are sharing information in social media using these hashtags. Please follow. And note that we have recently established a new LinkedIn group called Sustainable 6G, where you are more than welcome to join the discussion. And also, we will be advertising the upcoming events in our 6G channel. For and the full list of upcoming webinars is listed in there. And with this, I would like to thank our excellent speakers today. Thank you all. And thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope to see you again in the next webinar sessions. Goodbye.